Hello, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. The Champions Cup is back. Saracens have just beaten Edinburgh. I've just been watching that game. There's only one more game to go this weekend, the late kickoff on the Sunday between Ospreys and Leicester Tigers. But in this video, I'm going to look back on the opening round of what we've seen so far. There's been some really good stuff, some great games, but some bad things that I want to get into as well. In particular, some disappointing crowds and also the whole structure of the Champions Cup. It just needs improving. I think most people would agree on that. Remember to drop a comment down below, particularly on any of the games I touch on, but maybe your team that I don't give a mention to. Let me know what you think of the Champions Cup, of the issues I get into, and the opening round of fixtures that we have seen. Do subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Really appreciate all the support the channel's been getting over the last couple of months. So let's try and keep building that. And also like the video as well. Let's help out that algorithm. All right, let's get into it. So Saracens 30, Edinburgh 26. As I say, that game's literally just finished. Been watching that on kind of Sunday evening here in the UK. Saracens holding on for the victory in the end, but it was pretty close. You would have thought it was going to be more comfortable. And then Edinburgh right at the end, they had the ball. They got down into Saracens' half, but they just couldn't get that final try to get themselves the victory in the end. So another decent game we've actually seen. It's been a pretty good weekend of games, I would say, in the Champions Cup. From what we've seen, obviously a little bit different this year in terms of the South African sides coming in. I'm going to get into that as well. But I mentioned in the intro there's been some good and there's been some bad. The good stuff, I think we've seen some good matches. I'll get onto the Harlequins against the Sharks and some of the other ones in there as well. But I think there's been a lot of good matches, and that's kind of a consistent, I think, amongst domestic rugby in the Northern Hemisphere. Particularly, I watch a lot of the Premiership, so I'm coming particularly from that perspective, but we regularly see a really good product on the pitch. It's often elements outside of that, off the pitch, that has been letting it down. I just wonder whether the Champions Cup is going to be something similar this year. We'll wait and see. It's only one round in, but yeah, I think it's something to keep an eye on. I said in my last video that the introduction of the South African teams would be exciting. I stand by that. I like what they're going to add to the competition. I think it adds a lot more depth there, and also the different style of rugby that we're going to see. Any of you who've watched any of the games in the Northern Hemisphere this weekend would have seen the conditions. It has been absolutely Baltic. It's been in the minuses overnight, and then the max it's been getting to in the day is just a couple of degrees. There's been snow in parts of the country. There's been a lot of ice, and then you contrast that with what we've got in South Africa. Temperatures, close to 30, great running rugby in the summertime. I think actually that makes a really interesting element to this group stage, particularly for the teams that are having to travel to South Africa, and likewise the South African teams having to travel to Europe. How they fluctuate between personnel and the style of rugby they want to play is definitely something that I'm excited to see what happens in week 2, actually. I think that does make an interesting storyline. I did mention there's some bad, though. I think crowds in some parts is still a little bit of a concern. London Irish didn't get loads on Friday night against Montpellier. I know it's cold, it's a Friday kickoff, but against Montpellier, excellent team coming to London Irish, you'd have hoped for a bit more. And that was the case. That wasn't the only one. I think quite a few of the games that I've caught bits of, I thought that the crowds at times looked a little bit empty, which will concern the organisers. The reason for that, I believe, is the structure of the European competition. We've got 2 pools. Obviously, therefore, the pools are really big. You're not going to play everyone in your pool. So we'll see teams get results this weekend, but we don't necessarily know where they're going to be in that pool because it's based upon other teams' results as well, who they won't necessarily play. I just think it's a mess. And back in the day when it was pools of 4, and I know it had to change and they changed it over COVID, and perhaps it will eventually go back to that, but I just think it's messy. I think it's harder for people to get into. It's much harder to not necessarily understand, because who qualifies is quite straightforward, but I think actually too many teams qualify. All you have to do is win a game or 2, and you have a pretty good chance of qualifying for the knockout stages. And just in terms of knowing where your team are in comparison to any others, I think it's really messy. Do let me know what you think down below in the comments, but I would imagine a lot of people will be agreeing with me there. I think the structure of the competition needs to change, because no matter how good it is on the pitch, and I'm going to get into some of the games now, if it's really difficult to understand, or not difficult to understand because it's fairly straightforward, but if it's just confusion in terms of the pools and the standings, I just think it could be a lot better. I guess that's my point. Let's get on to some of those games, and starting on the Friday night, London Irish, they let it slip against Montpellier. They got themselves into a good position. Augustin Creevy was red carded, and then Montpellier came back into it. That's frustrating for Irish to lose at home. Good win for the French side. We know, some of their calibre and how good they can be. But for London Irish, I think an opportunity there after that opening 40 minutes, which they let slip away. We've also seen big wins for Leinster and La Rochelle. Very early stages, I know that. Would they be your favourites? La Rochelle, the defending champions. Leinster are always there or thereabouts when it comes to Europe. They're able to manage their team in the minutes of a lot of those players like Johnny Sexton because of the setup in Ireland. Leinster, I think, will be there. They both had really good victories. And it was a heck of a game in South Africa between the Sharks and Harlequins. Harlequins almost pulled off a trademark Quins comeback, which anyone who's watched them in the Gallagher Premiership the last few years will be accustomed to seeing. But it was really good to see them at least give it a good go on South African soil, because it was a game that looked dead and buried. There was a red card in it as well towards the end, which obviously did have an impact. But Quins did really, really well to come back into it. And Andre Esterhazen as well, on his home soil, put in a really good shift for Quins. He's been so important for them over the last few years. And it was a really great game. Pretty valuable result. Well, frustrating for Harlequins, but I think it was valuable for them to go there and put in a performance. And then they might be one of those teams, you know how I talk about the style and how the style might differ. It almost benefits Harlequins going away to South Africa to play in those conditions compared with playing at home almost, in terms of the conditions that they'll have to face. I know they'll love the home support, but certainly Sharks and Harlequins, I thought that was a really excellent game. I thought the Stormers did well against Claremont, particularly in that first half. Again, another game which got away from them in the second half. But as I say, in the first half, I thought the Stormers did well before Claremont came back into it. John Dobson, the Stormers coach, said last week that their aim was really to pick up the losing bonus point and then to really make a marker next weekend when they go back home. And that's always a factor with the Champions Cup and teams relying on their home form. If you can be hard to beat at home, all you might need to do is pick up some bonus points away from home. So excited to see how the Stormers go back at home. I thought it was a big win for Exeter as well. They beat Castres 11th in the top 14 at the moment, so they actually haven't had a great start to the season. But even so, away from home, Exeter, good result. Sam Simmons was the man of the match there. He scored a try, looked good. He almost gave a little reminder to the French. He'll be heading over to French soil to play his domestic rugby at the end of this season. And you could see why he's been recruited. He was pretty impressive. Also then Gloucester, they came back against Bordeaux. Bordeaux 8th in the top 14, so perhaps Gloucester would have been expected at home to do better than they did in the first half, but Tuasui was really good. Gloucester came back into it and they did get that result as well. And then another one today, a statement win actually, I think. One of the more eyebrow-raising results of this whole weekend was Sale beating Ulster today, whitewashing them at home. But even so, Ulster have had a pretty good start to the URC season. Sale have had an excellent start to the Premiership. And as I say, I think that is a statement win for Sale. For them to be able to do it in Europe, we'll see how they go as the campaign moves forward. But they look like a really good side this year under Alex Sanderson. So good for them, good win for Sale. And some other big results across the weekend. As I said at the start of the video, I'm recording this on Sunday evening. So Ospreys against Leicester Tigers kicks off in about 15 minutes time. Toulouse also beat Munster as well. That's a good win for Toulouse away to Munster. So hopefully I've gone through a lot of the results. Bulls beat Lyon, haven't mentioned that as well. Good 42-36 victory for the Bulls. But the opening round of the Champions Cup is here. It is pretty much in the books apart from that one game. What did you make of it, and what do you make of my criticisms at the moment? I like what's happening on the pitch, but in terms of the structure of the competition, I think it does let it down in terms of some of that off-field stuff. I'm going to be back this week. Hopefully we'll have some more updates in terms of the New England head coach. And also we'll get into some of those other games from the Champions Cup and Challenge Cup over the weekend. Remember, please do subscribe to the channel if you're new here, and also drop a comment down below. What did you make of everything this weekend? I'll see you in the next one.